All right, I'm going to show you the project that I'm currently working on, and it is a project of my own making, something I've wanted to do for a long time. So I've been interested in performance monitoring and charting, graphing, scoring, metrics, analysis, all that kind of stuff forever, going back 20, 25 years. I've always been building tools to do monitoring and things like that. And along the way, the tools that are out there have become far more sophisticated than they were and a lot better. Although I think there's still a lot of the same problems. But a few years ago, when I was kind of building the back end for some monitoring stuff, I discovered this website, Initial State. And at the time, I think Datadog was still around, and some other, there were Grafana was around, although it was very hard to like create dashboards automatically. I think at the time, still kind of is. I think you still have to kind of design them and all that. One of the things I believe about dashboards is, they should just kind of self-organize and kind of get created on their own. Really is a lot of wasted man hours. People designing dashboards. Now I know with Grafana you can import other people's dashboards, and that's cool. But you're still not seeing the information in front of you. A lot of times is just boring information that really shouldn't be on the screen because it really isn't anything that you need to be looking at. You need to be looking at things that are problems. Or at least that's initially what you should be looking at. But anyway, I found this website, Initial State, and I was impressed with it because it was, at the time, really easy to sign in, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you create these buckets. They call them buckets. And they have API keys, and you can very quickly stream things to these buckets, and they automatically start creating, the charts and the graphs. And there's the data. There's kind of a different view, a very dense view. I don't know. I think that was there at the time. And then they have all these charts and graphs. And obviously this is a dashboard that someone has spent some time designing. But if you didn't do this, it just kind of starts throwing up line charts. Why not? I mean, that's what it should do. And you could just use a curl command and send this thing data. And so I don't think it had some alerting maybe at the time. I can't recall. They do have, alerting and at least some type of alerting. So I thought this was pretty cool. And but when I started using it, like I would move things around, and you couldn't like save your data, or if you did something, it would kind of lose all of its state. And so I was a little frustrated with it. But I've always thought this was a good starting point. So that's a long way of saying my current project is basically I'm going to build. I've got all the back end components that I need to build something like this in Apex. And so I'm going to kind of show you very quickly right now what I've got so far. I've been moving a lot of things around in K2. Now, K2 is an open source project you can go and get yourself. But I have a lot of the tools. Like I have something called Statzilla in K2, which allows you to create buckets of data and chart and graph that data with another library and all this kind of stuff. I have alerting. I have contact management. I'm doing a lot of I'm changing a lot of that as I build Chartdensity, and Chartdensity is what I'm building now. I don't think it'll ever necessarily be, anything that necessarily is competing with any of the large companies in the market. I have some different ideas for it, and really I want a platform that I can experiment on, and I can try new ways of visualizing data, new ways of presenting data, new scoring mechanisms, open sourcing the scoring mechanisms so that people can contribute their own anomaly detection, engines and things like that. So I want to build something that I can build upon in the future, and that's what I'm working on. So let's go look at what we have. So we're building this within the context of K2, And K2 is a framework for developing apps. And so I have in my app directory Chartdensity and dev. And this is my code. And so it begins with the schema, the app schema. And I only have one table right now called datasets because most of the other stuff is already part of K2. And so that's what I want to show you now. If we go and look at the app PKG, app package, we just got a package body called app. We have a procedure in here somewhere called onCreateAccount. So the way K2 works is your SaaS auth code, which is your authorization code. So when somebody logs in and creates an account, this SaaS auth code looks for a procedure called onCreateAccount. And it will create one right here, creates an empty onCreateAccount procedure. But our code, we need to override that with our own onCreateAccount. And you can see in my case, I am then forwarding the request to my app package. That's where I want my code to live. I don't really want my code in this procedure. So SaaS auth automatically installs this procedure. You can override it and point it towards your own code. And what happens is when an account is created, it calls this and passes in the user ID so that you can do stuff with that in your app, because you usually need to hook into these events. Now, I used to have onDelete user, and I discovered that onDelete really doesn't make sense because you can fire something before you delete the user and after you delete the user, and you may need to do one or both, but onDelete user didn't make sense. And so I have since changed that to before delete user and after delete user, and you can probably expect I'm going to have a before create account and after create account. In fact, that is probably what I'm going to work on tonight because this is bothering me. And on login might go to before login and after login. And that would be, and then we have to decide whether the person is authenticated or not. So that I need to think about. So we have that code, and go back to our code in the package body. And what happens here is I have a bunch of steps, and I've laid them out here, but that's basically the same thing down here. So the first thing we do is we create a token for this user, and we give it we call it default token underscore user ID. And so this uses the K2 token code to create a token, which we will use for API. That'll be our API token for the user. So if you go back, if you look at any API-based service, there's API tokens, and then there's often a bucket or a bucket token or some other token that kind of defines something within the account that you're using. We're going to create a contact group, and we're going to call it default contact group user ID. We're going to create a contact, and that contact's going to be the user that's logged in right now. That'll be the first contact added, and then we're going to add that contact to the group. So this is all code that you can operate on today. Now, I have moved this out of a library down here called ArcSQL into K2 because it really wasn't meant to be a service, but I'm changing it so that it's a service. And all of this is going to be REST API enabled. And so you can basically install K2. You don't even need an Oracle, an Apex website necessarily, and you could basically use this as an API, just as a service. And that will be true of most of the things in K2. You can just turn them into services, including StatZilla, which is your statistics tracking, metrics tracking code. We're going to create a priority group. This is, critical, high, low, medium, that kind of thing. for alerting. We're going to add that priority group to the contact group. So the way a contact group works is a contact group, when an alert is open for a priority group, it sees what contact groups are associated with that priority group, and then it tries to send those alerts or route those alerts to the contacts in those contact groups. And then we finally create a data set. And then when we create this data set, it creates a Statzilla bucket. So here we go, create a bucket. This is the create dataset code. And then we insert a row into the dataset table and all that. So that is what you're seeing here is basically all the components I need before I start building some kind of site that kind of does what initial state does, or a lot of other sites. And so I'm at the point now that I'm ready to do that. And I want to show you the API code, because this is a new kind of twist that I have in the way I'm doing things. Is I'm creating a package called App API. So every app will have an App API package of some sort. It may not be called App API because obviously we'll have one for Statzilla, but it'll probably be called Statzilla API. And what we have in here is the first and most basic API that I can think of, which is basically kind of like a curl request, a get request. You're going to pass in the dataset token, the API key, the metric, and the value. We're not taking time. We're not taking anything. We're just as simple as possible. And we create a procedure that does this. Now I can write tests and actually run this code without needing a website. And so App API, or your application name API package, it's meant to contain, an intermediate interface for your REST services. Your REST services are going to point to this, but we don't need to worry about that right now. I have figured out how to use a bearer token, and that is, it will call K2 token to assert that it is a valid token, and then it does, let's see, somewhere in here it gets the bearer token. Yeah, it's K2 API. So there's a K2 API package, and it's got some tools in it like get bearer token, and you can go look at that on your own. But it's if the API key is not passed into here, it will try to get a bearer token. I like to use bearer tokens in the auth header, and this does work. So anyway, there's our code there, and then we eventually do a insert into stat in, and that is a Statzilla table that stores our stats until they get processed. So the next step would be this app API.SQL, which is the wrapper where we define a handler that calls that. And the nice thing about this is I'm probably going to go and start adding this app API for Statzilla, and it will have its own handlers, but you will be able to create handlers that point to those, basically copy the Statzilla intermediary here and change the paths for your app, and then it looks like it's your app, but it's basically the Statzilla RESTful interface. Anyway, that's how I think it's going to work. So the video is getting kind of long, and I just wanted to try getting a video out now that I've actually got my green screen working and all this kind of stuff. Hopefully this all works. So go check out the Git repository. Lots of changes are being checked in. It's getting really big, where if I step away from it for even a week or two, I start to have to get my bearings again once I start digging into things. But I'm very happy with things. I'm always trying to make it smaller, trying to make it simpler. I've got some things I'm going to rip out that don't need to be here, and this is a long ways from done. But a lot of the goal of having an actual project is, proving the development methodology that I'm using, that it's very fast and easy. It's easy to stay organized. and also building out all the kind of the services that are here, and eating your own dog food, testing these out. So how's this Google chart library work? It only does line charts right now, but by building something, I'll probably find some improvements that need to be made and make those to that. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I look forward to talking to you soon.